The bunker's concrete walls vibrated with each artillery shell that landed above, sending dust cascading like snow in the dim red light. Captain Maya Shun pressed her ear against the encrypted radio, her calloused fingers adjusting the frequency dial with the precision of a surgeon. Static filled the air, a white noise symphony that had become the soundtrack to their slow descent into hell. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Come in, base. This is Alpha 7. Do you copy? Her voice carried the weight of 3 sleepless days, each word measured and controlled despite the chaos erupting around them. The radio crackled back with nothing but interference. The same empty response they'd received for the past 18 hours since the communications blackout began. Staff Sergeant Mike Rodriguez emerged from the shadows of the equipment bay, his weathered face grim as he shook his head. Nothing on the backup channels either, Captain. Whatever they're jamming us with, it's sophisticated, military-grade stuff. He wiped grease from his hands with a rag that had seen better days, the fabric stained with the sweat and grime of their prolonged siege. Maya's dark eyes swept across the bunker's interior, taking inventory of their dwindling resources with the methodical precision that had kept her unit alive through countless missions. 6 soldiers remained of the original 12-person Delta Force team that had infiltrated this mountainous region of eastern Kandahar province. The mission had been straightforward on paper: locate and extract Dr. Sarah Whitman, a cryptographer whose groundbreaking work on quantum encryption had made her both invaluable to the U.S. military and a prime target for enemy forces. The mission had gone sideways within the first 6 hours. Lieutenant Torres sat hunched over a laptop in the corner, her fingers dancing across keys that seemed to mock her efforts with each failed decryption attempt. Elena Torres had been the youngest member ever inducted into Delta Force's intelligence division, her reputation built on an uncanny ability to break even the most sophisticated enemy communications. But for 3 days, she'd been staring at the same encrypted message that had been intercepted from enemy radio chatter, a string of numbers and symbols that seemed to shift and change meaning every time she thought she'd found a pattern. Still nothing? Maya asked, though she already knew the answer from the frustrated set of Elena's shoulders. It's like they're using some kind of adaptive algorithm, Elena muttered, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. Every time I think I've identified the substitution pattern, it shifts. The mathematical progression doesn't follow any standard cryptographic model I've ever encountered. She pushed back from the laptop, rubbing her eyes with the heels of her palms. Captain, I've run this through every decryption protocol we have. Standard Caesar ciphers, Vigenère tables. Even tried running it through the quantum algorithms Dr. Whitman was working on before she disappeared. Nothing. Maya knelt beside Torres, studying the screen filled with seemingly random characters. The message had been intercepted from a high-frequency burst transmission that lasted exactly 30 seconds, long enough to contain critical intelligence, but short enough to avoid most conventional tracking methods. Intelligence suggested it contained the location of not only Dr. Whitman, but potentially the entire enemy command structure in the region. The numbers seemed to dance before Maya's eyes. 714239153382144122629. The sequence continued for 847 characters, each one a potential key to saving not just their mission, but the lives of dozens of Allied personnel whose positions had been compromised when Dr. Whitman's quantum encryption research fell into enemy hands. What if it's not mathematical? Maya mused, her voice barely audible above the distant rumble of approaching aircraft. What if it's something else entirely? Corporal Jackson looked up from his position by the bunker's reinforced door, where he'd been monitoring the external cameras. Captain, we've got movement on the North Ridge. Looks like 3. No, 4 vehicles. Military configuration. His southern drawl carried an edge of concern that made everyone in the bunker pause their activities. Maya moved to the monitoring station, watching the grainy green images on the night vision display. The vehicles moved with purposeful coordination, their lights dark as they navigated the treacherous mountain roads. ETA to our position? 20 minutes, maybe less if they know the terrain. Jackson's hand instinctively moved to his rifle. Ma'am, if they've triangulated our position from our earlier transmissions. The implication hung heavy in the recycled air of the bunker. Maya's mind raced through their options, each one bleaker than the last. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and completely cut off from backup. The nearest Allied forces were over 200 miles away, assuming they even knew where to look. Without communications, they might as well be on another planet. Rodriguez, how much ammunition do we have left? Maya asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Enough for maybe 2 sustained firefights, Captain. 3 if we're lucky, and they're stupid. Rodriguez checked his inventory log, his expression grave. We've got grenades, but not enough to hold off a determined assault on this position. Maya nodded, her mind already shifting into the tactical assessment mode that had kept her alive. Through 8 years of special operations, the bunker was well constructed but not impregnable. It had been designed as a temporary intelligence gathering post, not a fortress. The reinforced concrete would stop small arms fire, but anything larger than a rocket-propelled grenade would punch through the walls like tissue paper. She returned to Elena's workstation, staring once again at the encrypted message that had become their obsession. 747 characters of seemingly random data that could hold the key to everything: Dr. Whitman's location, enemy troop movements, supply routes, command structure. Or it could be a grocery list written in an obscure dialect. There was no way to know without breaking the code. Tell me about the transmission itself, Maya said, settling into a chair beside Elena. Not the content, but the transmission. How was it sent? Elena pulled up the technical data on a secondary screen. High-frequency burst transmission, 30.7 seconds duration. Broadcast on multiple frequencies simultaneously, 2.4 GHz, 5.8 GHz, and 14.2 GHz. The signal strength was massive, required significant power generation. She paused, studying the waveform analysis. Captain, whoever sent this wanted to make sure it got through. This wasn't some routine communication. The bunker shuddered as another artillery shell landed somewhere above them, closer than the previous impacts. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and several pieces of equipment flickered momentarily as the electrical system strained under the vibration. They're getting our range, Jackson reported from his position. Next few rounds are going to be danger close. Maya closed her eyes for a moment, shutting out the chaos around her to focus on the problem at hand. 30 seconds. That's how long the transmission had lasted. In her experience, critical intelligence was always time-sensitive, and 30 seconds was just enough time to convey essential information without wasting bandwidth on unnecessary data. She thought about Dr. Whitman, whom she'd met briefly during a security briefing 6 months earlier. Sarah Whitman had been brilliant in that particular way that made conversations both fascinating and exhausting. Her mind operated on multiple levels simultaneously, seeing patterns and connections that others missed. She'd spoken about encryption not as mathematics but as music, describing the rhythm and flow of data as if it were a symphony waiting to be conducted. Elena, what if this isn't a traditional cipher at all? Maya asked, opening her eyes to focus on the screen. What if Dr. Whitman developed something completely new? Something that doesn't follow conventional cryptographic principles? Elena looked up from the screen, her eyes red-rimmed with fatigue. I've considered that, Captain. But without knowing the algorithm she was working on, we'd be shooting in the dark. Quantum encryption uses principles that our standard computers can't even process effectively. The sound of helicopter rotors began to penetrate the bunkers. Insulation, a deep rhythmic thumping that seemed to synchronize with Maya's heartbeat. She moved to the external monitors, watching as two attack helicopters circled their position like mechanical vultures. The vehicles they'd spotted earlier were now within visual range, their occupants likely preparing for a coordinated assault. "How long until they're in position?" Maya asked Jackson. 10 minutes, Captain. Maybe 8. Jackson checked his weapon one final time. "Ma'am, if we're going to call in an extraction, now would be the time." Maya almost laughed at the irony. Call in an extraction with what? Smoke signals? Their communications equipment was sophisticated enough to receive and analyze enemy transmissions, but apparently useless when it came to reaching their own command structure. She returned to the encrypted message, staring at the numbers with an intensity that made her eyes water. 714239, 153382144412629. There had to be a pattern, something they were missing. Dr. Whitman wouldn't have created an unbreakable code that would be counterproductive for Allied forces. She would have built in a key, a backdoor that someone with the right knowledge could exploit. "Elena, show me everything we know about Dr. Whitman's research," Maya said, her voice carrying the new edge of determination. "Not just the classified briefings, everything. Personal background, education, published papers, hobbies, anything that might give us insight into how her mind works." Elena pulled up a comprehensive file on her secondary screen. Dr. Sarah Elizabeth Whitman, age 34, Ph.D. in advanced mathematics from MIT, specialization in quantum computing applications. Born in Portland, Oregon. Parents were both music teachers. Interesting. Her father was a pianist, mother played violin. Elena scrolled through the biographical data. She published 17 papers on cryptographic theory before joining the military research program. Has a background in classical music theory, speaks 4 languages fluently, has a photographic memory for mathematical sequences. Maya felt something click in her mind, a connection forming like synapses firing across. A neural network, music teachers, classical music theory. She looked back at the encrypted message with fresh eyes. "Elena, what if this isn't mathematical encryption at all? What if it's musical?" Elena stared at Maya for a moment, then back at the screen. "You think she encoded intelligence data using musical notation?" "Not notation exactly, but musical principles. Harmony, rhythm, mathematical relationships between notes." Maya's excitement was building as the theory took shape. Think about it, she grew up in a musical household, has training in both advanced mathematics and music theory. What if she created an encryption algorithm based on musical patterns instead of traditional mathematical ones? The bunker shook violently as a direct hit landed somewhere on the structure above them. Emergency lighting kicked in as the main power fluctuated, casting eerie red shadows across their faces. In the distance, they could hear the sound of engines growing louder. "We're running out of time," Rodriguez warned, taking position near the bunker's main entrance. "Whatever we're going to figure out, it needs to happen fast." Maya grabbed a pencil and started writing numbers on a piece of paper, translating the first section of the encrypted message into a sequence she could visualize. 7142391533. If these represented musical notes or intervals, they would need to be converted to a scale that made sense within musical theory. "Elena, can you run this sequence through a musical conversion program? Treat each number as a note value in a 12-tone scale." Elena's fingers flew across the keyboard as she accessed a music composition program from the bunker's software. "Library. Converting now." "Captain, if you're right about this, we'd need to know what key signature she was using. What tempo, whether it's a major or minor scale ... Another explosion, close enough that they felt the shockwave through the floor. Equipment rattled on the shelves, and somewhere in the bunker's depths, an alarm began to sound. "They're probing our defenses," Jackson reported. Small arms fire. On the north entrance, testing our response time and firepower. Maya focused everything on the paper in front of her, blocking out the chaos around her. 7-14-23. If Dr. Whitman had used musical theory as the basis for her encryption, the numbers would correspond to something recognizable. Musical intervals, chord progressions, or rhythmic patterns that would be familiar to someone with her background. Then it hit her. The numbers weren't notes, they were measures. Beat counts in a musical composition. Elena, what if these aren't note values but temporal measurements? Beats per measure in a complex time signature? Maya's voice carried a new urgency. Run it as a rhythmic sequence, not a tonal one. Elena quickly reconfigured the program, inputting the sequence as rhythmic data rather than pitch information. The computer processed the information, generating a visual representation of the rhythm on screen. And suddenly, Maya saw it. The pattern wasn't random at all. It was a complex polyrhythm, the kind that would be familiar to any serious musician, but incomprehensible to someone without musical training. The numbers represented beats in overlapping time signatures: 7/8 time, 14/16 time, 23/32 time, creating a rhythmic pattern that, when properly decoded, would reveal the underlying message. That's it, Maya whispered, her heart racing with the thrill of discovery. It's not a cipher at all, it's a musical score. The intelligence is encoded in the rhythm itself. But even as the pieces began to fall into place, Maya realized they were out of time. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the bunker's corridors, accompanied by the harsh whisper of tactical radio communications in a foreign language. Their sanctuary had been compromised, and within minutes, they would be fighting for their lives. The question now wasn't just whether they could break Dr. Whitman's code, it was whether they would live long enough to act on whatever intelligence it contained. Maya's hands trembled slightly as she stared at the rhythmic pattern on Elena's screen, but not from fear, from recognition. The polyrhythm looked familiar, like something she'd encountered in another life, before Delta Force, before the military, before everything changed. She pressed her palms against her temples, trying to summon memories that felt like they belonged to someone else. Growing up in San Francisco's Richmond district, Maya had been surrounded by the sounds of her grandmother's erhu and her father's attempts at Western classical piano. The Chun household had been a collision of cultures, where Taiwanese folk melodies competed with Beethoven sonatas for airtime, and where a young Maya had learned to find harmony in chaos long before she understood that skill would one day save lives. Captain? Elena's voice pulled her back to the present. Are you seeing something in the pattern? Maya blinked, refocusing on the screen. The rhythmic sequence did look familiar, but she couldn't place where she'd encountered it before. Give me a moment, she murmured, closing her eyes to concentrate. Her daily routine for the past 3 years had been rigid, almost monastic in its precision. Wake at 05:00, physical training until 06:30, breakfast, briefings, mission prep, execution, debriefing, sleep, repeat. The structure had been her anchor after losing her previous team in Syria, a psychological scaffolding that kept her functioning when the weight of command threatened to crush her. But now, that same rigid thinking might be exactly what was preventing her from seeing the solution. She thought about Dr. Sarah Whitman, wondering what the woman's daily life had been like before her disappearance. According to her file, Whitman had been working 18-hour days on the quantum encryption project, but she'd also maintained a small apartment off base where neighbors reported hearing piano music late into the night. Classical pieces, mostly, but occasionally something more experimental. Modern compositions that seemed to follow mathematical rather than traditional musical principles. Elena, when you analyzed the signal characteristics earlier, you mentioned it was broadcast on multiple frequencies simultaneously. Maya said, her eyes still closed as she tried to piece together the puzzle. What were those frequencies again? 2.4. Gigahertz, 5.8 gigahertz, and 14.2 gigahertz, Elena replied, pulling up the technical data. Why? Maya felt another synaptic connection forming. Those aren't random frequencies. They're harmonics, mathematical relationships between sound waves. She opened her eyes, looking at Elena with growing excitement. If Dr. Whitman encoded the message using musical principles, she might have used harmonic frequencies to create layers of meaning. The sound of gunfire erupted from somewhere above them, followed by shouted commands in what sounded like Arabic. Jackson immediately moved to the bunker's internal communication system, coordinating with the two soldiers stationed at forward positions. "Contact north side. 2 hostiles neutralized," came the crackled report through their internal comms. "But Captain, there's more movement on the ridge. They're setting up for a major assault." Maya forced herself to compartmentalize, a skill she'd honed during her early years as a lieutenant when every decision carried the weight of other people's lives. The immediate tactical situation was critical, but the encrypted message might hold information that could change the entire strategic picture. She had to trust her team to handle the defense while she focused on the code. Her mind drifted back to her childhood, to Sunday afternoons when her grandmother would play the erhu while Maya's father accompanied on piano. They would improvise together, creating music that existed nowhere else in the world, melodies that were born and died in the span of a few minutes. Her grandmother had tried to teach Maya the traditional songs, but Maya had been more interested in the mathematical relationships between the notes, the way certain intervals created tension while others provided resolution. "What made you think of music in the first place, Captain?" Elena asked, her fingers poised over the keyboard as she waited for direction. Maya considered the question. It wasn't just Dr. Whitman's background or the mention of her musical parents. There was something else, something more personal. "When I was 12, I spent a summer with my great-aunt in Taipei," she said, her voice distant as she recalled the memory. "She was a code breaker for the Taiwanese military during the Cold War. She told me stories about how they used everything, poetry, music, even cooking recipes to hide intelligence from enemy interceptors." The memory became clearer as she spoke. Her great-aunt, Chen Wei-ming, had been a small woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind. She'd shown Maya examples of coded messages hidden in traditional Chinese songs, where the rhythm and tonal patterns of the language itself became the encryption key. She used to say that the best codes weren't mathematical, they were cultural. Maya continued, "Something that would be obvious to someone with the right background, but invisible to outsiders." Elena nodded, her understanding growing. So if Dr. Whitman created an encryption system based on musical theory, it would be nearly impossible to break unless you knew to look at it from that angle. Another burst of gunfire, closer this time. Rodriguez appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. "Captain, we've got company incoming from 3 directions. They're not just probing anymore, this is a full assault. We've got maybe 5 minutes before they breach the outer perimeter." Maya felt the familiar weight of command settling on her shoulders. 6 lives depended on her decisions, and potentially many more if the intelligence in that encrypted message was as critical as everyone believed. She thought about the soldiers under her command, each one a complete person with their own hopes, fears, and families waiting for them to come home. Elena Torres had joined the military to pay for college, but she'd stayed because she'd found something she was genuinely gifted at. The youngest of 4 children from a family of teachers in Phoenix, she'd always been the puzzle solver, the one who could look at a problem and see solutions that escaped others. Maya had watched Elena grow from an uncertain recruit into one of the most capable intelligence analysts in the special operations community. Rodriguez had been with Maya for 2 years, since her reassignment after Syria. He was steady, reliable, the kind of soldier who never questioned orders, but wasn't afraid to speak up when he saw problems. He had a wife and 2 daughters in Colorado Springs, and he carried their pictures in a waterproof case that he checked obsessively before every mission. Jackson was the newest addition to the team, but he'd proven himself during their last 3 operations. He had a dry sense of humor that helped maintain morale during difficult situations, and an uncanny ability to remain calm under fire. Maya knew he'd been recommended for promotion, though he'd requested to remain with the team, rather than accept a leadership position. Each of these people was trusting her to get them home alive, and Maya felt the weight of that responsibility like a physical force pressing down on her shoulders. She'd lost a team before 6 soldiers under her command had died, when an intelligence failure led them into an ambush in Syria. The memory of identifying their bodies still haunted her dreams, and she'd sworn it would never happen again. But here they were, trapped in a bunker with enemy forces closing in, their only hope lying in an encrypted message that might not even contain actionable intelligence. Maya's training told her to focus on the immediate tactical situation, to prepare for the coming assault and fight their way out if possible. But her instincts told her that the code was the key to everything, not just their current predicament, but the entire regional situation. She looked back at the screen, at the rhythmic pattern that Alina had generated from the numeric sequence. The numbers still looked familiar, but she couldn't place where she'd seen them before. It was like trying to remember a song you'd heard in childhood. You could hum the melody, but the words remained just out of reach. "Elena, can you play it?" Maya asked suddenly. "Convert the rhythmic pattern to actual sound?" Elena quickly configured the audio output, and suddenly the bunker filled with an unusual rhythm complex, layered, but strangely compelling. It wasn't quite music, but it wasn't random noise either. It had structure, intentionality, and Maya recognized it. "Stop," she said, her voice sharp with sudden understanding. "Play just the first 16 beats again." The rhythm repeated, and Maya felt her heart racing as memories flooded back. She'd heard this pattern before, not in childhood but much more recently. During the intelligence briefing 6 months ago, when she'd first met Dr. Whitman, the woman had been nervous, tapping her fingers on the conference table in a complex pattern while she talked about quantum encryption principles. At the time, Maya had assumed it was just a nervous habit, the kind of unconscious movement that people make when they're thinking about complex problems. But now she realized it had been something more. Dr. Whitman had been drumming out the rhythm that would later become the key to her encryption system. "She was showing us the key," Maya whispered, more to herself than to Elena. 6 months ago, during the briefing, she was literally drumming out the decryption key on the table. Elena looked up from the screen, her eyes wide with understanding. "If you remember the pattern, we can use it to decode the message." Maya closed her eyes, trying to recall the exact rhythm of Dr. Whitman's finger tapping. It had been distinctive, almost hypnotic in its complexity. She began to tap it out on the desk, slowly at first, then with growing confidence as the memory became clearer. The pattern was polyrhythmic, just like the encoded message, but it followed a specific structure: 3 beats in 4/4 time, then 2 beats in 3/4 time, then a syncopated pattern that seemed to reset the entire sequence. It was the kind of rhythm that would stick in your memory once you heard it, but would be nearly impossible to recreate unless you understood the underlying mathematical relationship. "That's it," Elena said excitedly, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she input Maya's rhythm as a decryption key. "If Dr. Whitman used this pattern as the basis for her algorithm, we should be able to reverse engineer the encoding process." The bunker shook violently as an explosion went off somewhere nearby, close enough that they felt the shockwave through the reinforced walls. Emergency lighting flickered, and several pieces of equipment momentarily lost power. "They're at the outer perimeter," Rodriguez reported over the internal comms. "Heavy weapons, coordinated assault. We're not going to be able to hold this position much longer." Maya watched Elena's screen as the decryption program processed the encoded message. Using the rhythmic key she'd provided, Numbers began to resolve into letters, random characters organizing themselves into recognizable words. It was working, but even as hope began to build in her chest, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The enemy forces outside weren't just randomly attacking, they were specifically targeting this bunker, which meant they knew about the intercepted message. If they breached the bunker's defenses, all of this work would be meaningless. She thought about her father, who had died of cancer 3 years earlier without ever knowing the full extent of what Maya did for a living. He'd been proud of her military service, but he'd also worried about the toll it was taking on her personally. During their last conversation, he'd asked her whether she was happy, and Maya had realized she didn't know how to answer the question. Happiness seemed like a luxury that soldiers couldn't afford, especially soldiers in her position. Every mission carried the potential for loss. Every decision could mean the difference between life and death for her team. Maya had learned to find satisfaction in mission success and team safety, but happiness felt like something that belonged to a different life now. Watching Elena work frantically to decode Dr. Whitman's message while explosions echoed around them, Maya wondered if this might be the last problem she ever had the chance to solve. The irony wasn't lost on her. After years of successful missions, they might be brought down by their inability to break a code created by someone who was supposed to be on their side. "Almost there," Elena muttered, her eyes locked on the screen, as more of the message resolved into readable text. "Captain, I think we're actually going to crack this thing." Maya felt a spark of hope, but it was tempered by the reality of their situation. Even if they successfully decoded the message, they still had to survive long enough to act on whatever intelligence it contained. And with enemy forces closing in from 3 directions, survival was looking increasingly unlikely. The sound of automatic weapon fire erupted from multiple positions around the bunker, followed by the distinctive whistle of incoming mortar. The assault had begun in earnest, and Maya knew that within minutes, her team would be fighting for their lives. But for now, she kept her eyes fixed on Elena's screen, watching as Dr. Whitman's carefully crafted code slowly revealed its secrets. Whatever those secrets were, Maya was determined to see them through to the end. The first mortar round landed 50 meters north of the bunker, sending a shockwave through the ground that rattled every piece of equipment in their makeshift command center. Maya felt the vibration in her bones as she watched Elena's decryption. Programs slowly parsed through Dr. Whitman's encoded message. Words were beginning to emerge from the chaos of numbers, extraction, coordinates, compromised, but the full context remained frustratingly unclear. "Contact, contact." Jackson's voice crackled through their internal communication system from his position at the north entrance. "Multiple hostiles advancing on position Alpha. I count at least 12, maybe more. They've got heavy weapons." Maya grabbed her rifle and moved to the tactical display, watching the feeds from their external cameras as enemy forces coordinated their assault. These weren't irregular fighters or local militias. The attackers moved with professional precision, their equipment and tactics indicating advanced military training. Someone had sent their best people to secure whatever was in that bunker. "Rodriguez, what's your status on the east approach?" Maya called into her radio. 3 hostiles neutralized, but they're just the advanced scouts," Rodriguez replied, his voice tight with concentration. "Captain, there's something you need to know. I recovered some equipment from one of the bodies. This isn't standard insurgent gear. They're carrying NATO-spec communications equipment and tactical computers. Whoever's attacking us has serious backing." Maya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the bunker's climate control system. NATO equipment suggested either stolen military supplies or worse, involvement from a hostile state actor with access to Western military technology. If their attackers had that level of sophistication, the situation was far more serious than a simple intelligence recovery operation. Elena looked up from her screen, her face pale in the emergency lighting. "Captain, I'm getting more of the message decoded. And what I'm seeing doesn't make sense. Dr. Whitman isn't just reporting her location. She's warning about something called Operation Nightfall. It looks like she discovered something major before she disappeared. Another explosion, closer this time, sent dust cascading from the ceiling. Maya felt the pressure change in her ears as the bunker's ventilation system struggled to maintain atmospheric balance. Through the external feeds, she could see muzzle flashes in the darkness as Jackson engaged targets from his defensive position. "Elena, how much more do you need to decode the full message?" Maya asked, her tactical mind calculating time, ammunition, and survival probabilities. "Maybe 10 minutes, maybe 15. The algorithm is complex, and some sections are more heavily encrypted than others." Elena's fingers never stopped moving across the keyboard, even as explosions continued to rock their position. "But Captain, what I'm seeing so far suggests that Dr. Whitman didn't just disappear. She was extracted by her own people because she discovered something that compromised the entire mission." Maya frowned, processing this new information. "What do you mean? Extracted by her own people?" "The coordinates she's providing aren't for a rescue, they're for a meeting point. She's trying to communicate with allied forces, but she can't use standard channels because the communication network has been compromised." Elena highlighted sections of the partially decoded message on her screen. "Look at this," she's referencing specific code names that only senior intelligence officials would know. The implication hit Maya like a physical blow. If Dr. Whitman had discovered that their communication networks were compromised, it meant that every mission, every troop movement, every strategic decision was potentially being monitored by hostile forces. The ramifications were staggering. "Jackson, fall back to position Beta," Maya ordered into her radio. "We're going to consolidate our defensive perimeter." "Roger that, Captain." "But we've got a problem. They're setting up what looks like a heavy machine gun position on the ridge. Once that's operational, they'll have overlapping fields of fire on all our exits." Maya studied the tactical display, her mind racing through possible solutions. The bunker had been designed with multiple escape routes, but if the enemy had positioned themselves correctly, those routes would become death traps. They needed to break the siege before the attackers could complete their encirclement, but more importantly, they needed to finish decoding Dr. Whitman's message. If the intelligence was as critical as it appeared, getting that information to Allied command could be more important than their own survival. "Rodriguez, I need you to create a diversion on the east side," Maya ordered. "Give them something to focus on while Elena finishes the decryption." "Understood, Captain." "I'll make some noise." Maya turned back to Elena, who was working with Anne. Intensity that bordered on obsession. "What else are you seeing in the message?" "References to something called the Architects," Elena replied, highlighting another section of decoded text. "It looks like Dr. Whitman discovered that the enemy isn't just a terrorist organization, or even a state actor, it's something bigger. A network of people embedded within Allied intelligence services." The sound of sustained automatic weapons. Fire erupted from the east side of the bunker, followed by Rodriguez's voice over the radio. "Diversion active. I've got their attention, but I can't hold this position for long." Maya felt the weight of command pressing down on her shoulders. 6 soldiers under her command, potentially critical intelligence, and an enemy force that seemed to know exactly where they were and what they were protecting. Every decision she made in the next few minutes could determine not just the fate of her team, but potentially the outcome of the broader conflict. She thought about the briefing that had started all of this 6 weeks earlier in a nondescript conference room at Bagram Air Base. Colonel Sarah Matthews, the intelligence officer who had assigned them this mission, had been unusually vague about the details. Find Dr. Whitman, secure her research, and extract both to a safe location. Simple on paper, catastrophic in execution, but now Maya wondered if Colonel Matthews had known more than she'd revealed. The mission parameters had been unusually restrictive, no communication with outside units, No deviation from the planned route, no backup support, unless specifically requested through encrypted channels. At the time, Maya had assumed it was standard operational security. Now she wondered if it had been something else entirely. "Elena, are there any references to Colonel Matthews in that message?" Maya asked, a terrible suspicion beginning to form. In her mind, Elena searched through the decoded sections, her eyes scanning rapidly across the text. Not by name, but there are references to compromised command structure and hostile infiltration at senior levels. "Captain, if Dr. Whitman is right, we might not be able to trust anyone in our chain of command." The bunker shuddered as another heavy round impacted somewhere above them. Maya could hear the distinctive sound of reinforced concrete cracking, followed by the hiss of damaged ventilation systems. Their sanctuary was being systematically destroyed, and time was running out. "Jackson, status report," Maya called into her radio. "They're bringing up heavier weapons, Captain. Looks like rocket-propelled grenades, maybe even anti-tank missiles. If they get those in position, these walls won't protect us." Maya made a decision that went against every instinct in her tactical playbook. Instead of preparing for the final defensive stand, she moved to Elena's workstation and began studying the partially decoded message herself. If they were going to die in this bunker, she was going to make sure the intelligence died with them, or that it got to people who could act on it. "Elena, can you isolate the sections that deal with specific locations and personnel?" Maya asked. "If we can't decode the entire message, at least we can try to extract the most critical information." "Already working on it," Elena replied, her voice hoarse with exhaustion and stress. "I've got what looks like coordinates for Dr. Whitman's current location, plus a list of compromised intelligence assets. But Captain, there's something else, references to a planned operation that's supposed to happen within the next 48 hours. Maya felt her blood run cold. "What kind of operation?" "Mass casualty event targeting Allied bases throughout the region. If Dr. Whitman's intelligence is accurate, they're planning coordinated attacks on at least a dozen installations, including major logistics hubs and command centers." The scope of the threat was overwhelming. Maya had been focused on their immediate survival, but the decoded message suggested they were dealing with something far larger than a single compromised mission. "Rodriguez, fall back to the central chamber," Maya ordered. "We're changing tactics. Captain, if I abandon this position, they'll have a clear approach from the east," Rodriguez protested. "That's an order, Sergeant. We need everyone here for what comes next." Maya turned to Elena, her decision crystallizing as she spoke. "How long to decode the operational details of these planned attacks?" "If I focus just on that section, maybe 5 minutes. But Captain, the enemy forces are going to breach our perimeter before then." "Then we hold them for 5 minutes," Maya said with a finality that surprised even her. "Elena, you keep working on that code. Everyone else, prepare for close quarters combat." The next few minutes unfolded like a choreographed dance of violence and desperation. Rodriguez returned to the central chamber just as the first enemy soldiers breached the north entrance. Jackson's position became untenable when a rocket-propelled grenade punched through the reinforced door, filling the corridor with smoke and debris. Maya found herself in the peculiar position of fighting a gun battle while trying to memorize coordinates and personnel lists from Alana's screen. The contradiction would have been absurd under different circumstances. She was literally fighting for her life, while trying to absorb intelligence that could save thousands of others. "Contact left," Jackson shouted, engaging targets that had somehow infiltrated through a breach in the east wall. The enclosed space amplified the sound of gunfire to painful levels, but Maya forced herself to focus on Alana's screen even as bullets whined overhead. The tactical situation deteriorated rapidly. Their attackers weren't just trying to overrun the bunker, they were systematically destroying communication equipment and computer systems. Maya realized with growing alarm that someone had given them specific instructions about what to target. This wasn't a random assault. It was a precision operation designed to prevent the intelligence from leaving the bunker. "Elena, whatever. You're going to decode, do it now," Maya shouted over the sound of combat. "I've got coordinates for the planned attacks," Elena replied, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "Bagram Air Base, Kandahar Logistics Center, 3 forward operating bases in Helmand Province. Captain, if this intelligence is accurate, they're planning to hit every major Allied installation in the region simultaneously." Maya memorized the coordinates as quickly as Elena could read them, committing the information to memory with the same intensity she'd once used to memorize her grandmother's traditional songs. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was using childhood techniques to preserve intelligence that could prevent a catastrophe. "There's more," Elena continued, her fingers flying across the keyboard even as explosions echoed through the bunker. Dr. Whitman identified specific individuals within Allied intelligence who are feeding information to the enemy. Code names, positions, access levels. "Captain, this goes all the way to the top of the command structure." A grenade detonated in the corridor outside their chamber, close enough that Maya felt the pressure wave and heard shrapnel embed itself in the reinforced walls. The enemy was getting closer, and their ammunition was running dangerously low. "Jackson, how many rounds do you have left?" Maya called out. "2 magazines, Captain. Maybe 3 minutes of sustained fire." Rodriguez appeared in the doorway, his uniform torn and bloodied, but his weapon ready. "East corridor is compromised. They're setting up for a final assault from multiple directions." Maya made a decision that she knew would haunt her if she survived. "Elena, transmit whatever you've decoded to every Allied frequency you can reach. Broadcast it in the clear if you have to." "Captain, that will compromise our position completely. They'll triangulate our transmission, and they already know where we are," Maya interrupted. "But if this intelligence is accurate, our position doesn't matter. Getting this information to Allied command does." Elena nodded, her hands moving across the transmission controls with practiced efficiency. "Broadcasting now on all military frequencies. Emergency priority, authentication codes, the works." The response was immediate and devastating. The enemy forces outside the bunker increased their assault to a frenzied intensity, as if they understood that time was running out. Heavy weapons. Fire concentrated on the bunker's communication arrays, trying to prevent the intelligence from reaching its destination. But it was too late. Maya watched Elena's transmission status indicators as the decoded intelligence propagated across Allied communication networks. Within minutes, command centers throughout the region would receive Dr. Whitman's warning about the planned attacks and the compromised personnel within their own ranks. "Transmission complete," Elena reported, just as the lights went out completely. "Emergency." Power kicked in seconds later, bathing everything in red light that made the bunker feel like the interior of a beating heart. Maya could hear enemy voices in the corridors, speaking in what sounded like a mixture of Arabic and English. They were close enough that individual words were becoming audible. "Time to go," Maya announced, though she wasn't sure where they could go. The bunker's escape routes had been systematically blocked or compromised, and their ammunition was nearly exhausted. Then Elena made a discovery that changed everything. "Captain, there's a final section of Dr. Whitman's message that I haven't decoded yet," she said, her voice carrying a strange mixture of excitement and fear. "It's not intelligence about enemy operations, it's escape route coordinates. She's providing a way out." Maya leaned over Elena's shoulder, studying the partially decoded information. "What kind of escape route?" "Underground tunnel system, apparently built during the Soviet occupation. Dr. Whitman must have discovered it during her time in the region." Elena highlighted the relevant coordinates on her screen. "If her information is accurate, there's a tunnel entrance behind the equipment storage area. that connects to a cave system extending for several kilometers. Maya looked toward the equipment storage area, a section of the bunker she'd barely paid attention to during their 3-day siege. It was possible that Dr. Whitman had included escape route information in her message, anticipating that allied forces might need it. But it was also possible that the tunnel system was compromised, monitored, or simply no longer accessible. How much of the escape route information have you decoded? Maya asked. About 60%. I've got the entrance, coordinates, and the general direction, but not the complete route or the exit point. The sound of shaped charges being attached to the bunker's main entrance made the decision for them. Maya grabbed her rifle and moved toward the equipment storage area, followed by Elena and the rest of the team. If Dr. Whitman's escape route existed, they had perhaps minutes to find it before the enemy breached their final defensive position. Rodriguez and Jackson took positions covering the storage area entrance, while Maya and Elena searched for signs of a hidden tunnel. The storage area was cramped, filled with communication equipment, spare weapons, and emergency supplies. But as Maya examined the rear wall more carefully, she noticed that the concrete seemed different, newer, as if it had been patched or modified sometime after the original construction. Elena, bring that portable scanner over here, Maya ordered. I want to see what's behind this wall. The scanner revealed what Maya had hoped to find, a hollow space extending beyond the apparent boundary of the bunker. The wall wasn't solid concrete. It was a false barrier designed to conceal the tunnel entrance Dr. Whitman had discovered. But finding the entrance and accessing it were two different problems. The false wall appeared to be secured with some kind of electronic locking mechanism, and Maya didn't have the tools or the time for a subtle approach. Stand back, she told Elena, raising her rifle toward what appeared to be the weakest section of the wall. The controlled demolition that followed was more art than science. Maya used precisely aimed shots to weaken the wall's structural integrity, without causing a collapse that would block the tunnel entrance. As chunks of concrete fell away, a dark opening became visible behind the false barrier. The tunnel beyond was narrow, barely wide enough for a single person, and disappeared into darkness that their tactical lights couldn't penetrate. But it was real, and it offered the only alternative to a final stand that would certainly end in death. Elena, how much of the route information do you need to navigate this tunnel system? Maya asked. Ideally all of it. But if we're just trying to get clear of the immediate area, the partial information should be sufficient. Elena grabbed her laptop and portable communication equipment. Captain, I can continue decoding the route information as we move, assuming we have power and the tunnel doesn't interfere with the wireless connection. Maya made the call that defined everything that followed. We're going into the tunnel. Elena leads with navigation. I'll take point. Rodriguez and Jackson cover our rear. If we get separated, everyone knows the primary intelligence from Dr. Whitman's message. Make sure it reaches Allied command even if we don't make it out. As they prepared to enter the tunnel, Maya took one last look around the bunker that had been their home for 3 days. Equipment worth millions of dollars, tactical gear that represented years of military development, and the accumulated expertise of some of the most highly trained soldiers in the world, all of it about to be abandoned, because a brilliant woman they'd never met had hidden an escape route in a musical code. The sound of the main entrance being breached echoed through the bunker as Maya led her team into the darkness of Dr. Whitman's tunnel. Behind them, enemy soldiers would find an empty command center and the lingering electronic signatures of a transmission that had already changed the strategic situation throughout the region. Ahead lay kilometers of underground passages, potential dangers that could range from cave-ins to hostile forces, and the uncertainty of whether Dr. Whitman's escape route would actually lead them to safety. But for the first time in 3 days, Maya felt something approaching hope. They were moving again, taking action instead of simply reacting to enemy initiatives. And somewhere in the darkness ahead, Dr. Sarah Whitman's musical code was still revealing its secrets, one decoded character at a time. The tunnel system that Dr. Whitman had discovered proved to be a marvel of Soviet-era engineering, carved through solid rock with mathematical precision that would have impressed the cryptographer herself. Maya led her team through passages that alternated between claustrophobic narrowness and cathedral-like chambers, following Elena's partially decoded navigation instructions, while their tactical lights carved through darkness that seemed to absorb illumination. 3 hours into their underground journey, Elena made a discovery that stopped them in their tracks. "Captain, I've decoded another section of Dr. Whitman's message," she announced, her voice echoing strangely in the stone chamber where they'd paused to rest. "She's not just providing escape routes and intelligence about enemy operations. She's telling us where she is." Maya knelt beside Elena, studying the laptop screen that had become their lifeline to the surface world. "What do you mean?" "The coordinates she provided aren't just meeting points, they're real-time location updates. Dr. Whitman is alive, and she's been tracking Allied troop movements through compromised communication channels." Elena highlighted sections of decoded text that contained familiar military code designations. "Captain, she knows we're here. She knows about our mission, our current situation, and she's been trying to guide us to her location." The implications were staggering. Maya had assumed that Dr. Whitman's message was a desperate communication sent before her capture or disappearance. But if Elena's analysis was correct, the cryptographer was actively monitoring the situation and providing real-time assistance through her encoded transmissions. "How is that possible?" Rodriguez asked, checking his weapon while keeping one eye on the tunnel behind them. "We've been cut off from all communication for days." Elena pulled up technical data from their earlier signal interception. "The transmission we intercepted wasn't just broadcast once. It's been repeating every 12 hours with slight modifications. Dr. Whitman has been updating the intelligence in real time, adjusting the information based on changing tactical situations." Maya felt a mixture of admiration and unease. Dr. Whitman's operational security was exceptional, but her ability to monitor Allied communications suggested access to systems that should have been secure. Either she had maintained contact with friendly forces, or she had penetrated enemy networks more deeply than anyone had realized. "Elena, can you determine her current location from the latest updates?" Maya asked. "Working on it now," Elena replied, her fingers dancing across the keyboard as she processed the most recent sections of decoded text. "She's providing coordinates that suggest she's mobile, moving through the same general area where we originally supposed to extract her." Jackson appeared from his scouting position deeper in the tunnel system, his expression grim. "Captain, we've got a problem. There are fresh boot prints in the mud ahead, and they're not ours. Someone else has been using these tunnels recently." Maya felt her tactical awareness shift into high gear. The tunnel system they'd assumed was their private escape route might be monitored or actively used by hostile forces. How recent? Within the last few hours, maybe less. Multiple individuals, military-grade boots, moving in the same direction we're heading. Maya weighed their options quickly. They could retreat through the tunnels they'd already traversed, but that would take them back toward the bunker and the enemy forces that had overrun it. They could find an alternative route through the tunnel system, but Elena's navigation information was incomplete, and they might become lost in the underground maze. Or they could continue forward, accepting the risk of contact with whoever was ahead of them. "Elena, how much more of Dr. Whitman's navigation data do you need to reach her location?" Maya asked. "Maybe 20 minutes of processing time, assuming the algorithm continues to work correctly." Elena saved her progress and prepared to pack up the laptop. "But Captain, if we're going to encounter other people in these tunnels, we should know who they are before we stumble into them." Maya made the decision that would define everything that followed. "We continue forward, but we do it tactically." "Elena, Keep working on the decryption as we move. Rodriguez and Jackson, standard patrol formation with noise discipline. If there are other people in these tunnels, we find out who they are before they find us. The next section of tunnel system revealed evidence of recent occupation that went far beyond boot prints in the mud. Maya discovered concealed supply caches, communication equipment, and sleeping areas that suggested the tunnels had been used as a base of operations for an extended period. Someone had established a sophisticated underground facility in the passages that Dr. Whitman had identified as an escape route. "Captain, you need to see this," Rodriguez called from a side chamber that branched off the main tunnel. Maya followed Rodriguez's voice and found herself in a natural cave that had been converted into a communication center. Banks of electronic equipment lined the walls, powered by portable generators that hummed quietly in the stone chamber. Multiple computer terminals displayed real-time intelligence feeds, satellite imagery, and communication intercepts from across the region. And, sitting at the central workstation, calmly monitoring the displays as if she'd been expecting them, was Dr. Sarah Whitman. "Captain Chun," Dr. Whitman said without turning around, her voice carrying the same calm professionalism Maya remembered from their brief meeting 6 months earlier. "I was wondering when you'd decode enough of my message to find your way here." Maya kept her weapon ready but didn't aim it directly at Dr. Whitman. The situation was too complex for hasty decisions. "Dr. Whitman, we've been searching for you for 6 days. We were told you'd been captured or killed." Dr. Whitman finally turned around, revealing a face that showed the strain of weeks spent in hiding, but also a sharp intelligence that seemed to take in every detail of Maya's team. "Captured, yes. Killed, obviously not. As for the search, I've been monitoring your communication since you entered the region. Your mission parameters were compromised from the beginning." Elena stepped forward, her laptop still open, as she continued to process Dr. Whitman's encoded messages. "The intelligence you've been broadcasting, Operation Nightfall, the compromised personnel, the planned attacks, how did you acquire this information?" Dr. Whitman gestured toward the communication equipment surrounding them. "When my original extraction failed and I was taken by hostile forces, I discovered that my captors knew far more about Allied operations than they should have. It became clear that someone within our own intelligence structure was providing them with classified information." Maya studied the displays around the cave, noting the sophistication of the surveillance systems Dr. Whitman had assembled. "So, you escaped and set up this operation to gather intelligence on our own people." "I didn't escape," Dr. Whitman corrected, her voice carrying a note of bitterness that surprised Maya. "I was traded, exchanged for intelligence that my handlers valued more than my life. But what they didn't realize was that I'd already discovered the extent of the security breaches within Allied command." The revelation hit Maya like a physical blow. "You're saying Allied intelligence traded you to hostile forces?" "Specifically, Colonel Sarah Matthews, the same officer who briefed your team for this mission." Dr. Whitman pulled up a file on one of her terminals, displaying communication intercepts that showed familiar call signs and encryption patterns. "She's been feeding operational intelligence to enemy forces for at least 8 months, possibly longer." Rodriguez moved to a position where he could watch the tunnel entrance while still listening to the conversation. "MAAM, if that's true, then this entire mission was designed to fail. We were never meant to extract you. We were meant to be eliminated along with any evidence of the security breach." Dr. Whitman nodded grimly. "Your mission parameters ensured that you'd be isolated, cut off from backup, and vulnerable to the kind of coordinated assault you experienced at the bunker. Colonel Matthews provided the enemy with your exact location, communication protocols, and operational timeline." Maya felt a cold rage building in her chest as the implications became clear. 6 soldiers under her command had been placed in mortal danger, not because of enemy action, but because of betrayal from within their own ranks. The mission that was supposed to rescue Dr. Whitman had actually been designed to silence her permanently. What about the planned attacks? Elena asked, her voice tight with controlled anger. Operation Nightfall, is that real? Dr. Whitman turned to another terminal, displaying a tactical map that showed Allied installations throughout the region. Real and imminent. The coordinated attacks are scheduled to begin in 18 hours, timed to coincide with a shift change. That will minimize defensive capabilities at each target. Colonel Matthews provided detailed information about security protocols, patrol schedules, and defensive weaknesses. The scope of the betrayal was overwhelming. Maya had been focused on the immediate survival of her team, but Dr. Whitman's intelligence revealed a conspiracy that threatened every Allied service member in the region. Thousands of lives hung in the balance, and the enemy had been given every advantage needed to ensure maximum casualties. Can you prove this? Maya asked, her command training overriding her emotional response to the situation. Dr. Whitman gestured toward a bank of recording equipment. I've been intercepting and documenting Colonel Matthews' communications with enemy forces for the past 3 weeks. Every conversation, every intelligence transfer, every piece of classified information she's provided. It's all here. Elena moved to the recording equipment, her eyes widening as she reviewed the stored data. Captain, there are hours of intercepted communications here. Real-time coordination between Colonel Matthews and enemy command structure. This isn't just betrayal, it's active collaboration with hostile forces. Maya studied the evidence displayed across Dr. Whitman's terminals, her tactical mind processing the implications of each piece of intelligence. Dr. Whitman, why didn't you try to communicate this information through standard channels? Because standard channels are compromised, Dr. Whitman replied simply. Colonel Matthews has access to virtually every communication system used by Allied forces in this region. Any attempt to expose her through normal intelligence channels would have been intercepted and neutralized. Jackson returned from his watch. Position at the tunnel entrance, his expression alert. Captain, we've got movement in the main tunnel. Multiple contacts, moving this way with purpose. Maya immediately shifted into tactical mode. How many and how far? At least 6, maybe 8. Professional movement, coordinated advance. They'll be here in 10 minutes, maybe less. Dr. Whitman began rapidly shutting down her equipment, transferring critical files to portable storage. Devices. Colonel Matthews has been tracking your progress through the tunnel system. I suspect she sent a cleanup team to eliminate all evidence of her betrayal. Maya felt the weight of command settle on her shoulders once again, but this time it was different. She wasn't just responsible for the survival of her immediate team. She was responsible for ensuring that the intelligence they'd discovered reached people who could act on it. The betrayal by Colonel Matthews had to be exposed, and the planned attacks had to be prevented. Elena, how long to copy all of Dr. Whitman's intelligence files? Maya asked. At least 15 minutes for a complete transfer, Elena replied, already connecting her equipment to Dr. Whitman's systems. We don't have 15 minutes, Rodriguez pointed out, checking his ammunition supply. If hostile forces are moving through the tunnels, we need to be gone in 5. Maya made a command decision that would echo through her career for years to come. Dr. Whitman, you're coming with us. Elena, copy what you can in 3 minutes, then we move. Everyone else, prepare for contact. Dr. Whitman looked up from her equipment shutdown, her expression skeptical. Captain, my intelligence gathering operation here represents months of work. If we abandon it now, we lose the ability to monitor enemy communications in real time. If we stay here, we lose everything, Maya replied with finality. The intelligence is worthless if we're dead. We extract now, and we find another way to expose Colonel Matthews and prevent Operation Nightfall. As her team prepared for another dangerous journey through the tunnel system, Maya couldn't help but reflect on the irony of their situation. They'd started this mission believing they were rescuing a kidnapped ally from enemy forces. Instead, they discovered a network of betrayal that reached into the highest levels of Allied command, and they were now fleeing from their own people, who wanted to silence them permanently, but they had the evidence they needed to expose the conspiracy. And more importantly, they had 18 hours to prevent a catastrophic attack on Allied installations throughout the region. The question now was whether they could stay alive long enough to get the intelligence to people who could act on it. As the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the tunnel system, Maya led her expanded team deeper into the underground maze, carrying with them the evidence that could save thousands of lives, if they could survive long enough to deliver it. The emergency meeting convened 18 hours later in a secure facility 40 kilometers from the tunnel system. Looked nothing like the Hollywood version of military crisis management. No dramatic music, no shouting, no theatrical finger-pointing, just tired professionals, making life and death decisions with incomplete information and impossible time constraints. Maya sat at a conference table that had seen better days. Dr. Whitman's intelligence files spread before a collection of officers whose combined experience represented decades of counterintelligence operations. General Patricia Hawkins, the regional commander, had arrived by helicopter after Maya's team successfully transmitted Dr. Whitman's evidence through secure channels. Colonel Sarah Matthews was notably absent, having been detained pending investigation. 3 hours earlier, preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Captain Chun, walk us through the timeline one more time, General Hawkins requested, her voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who had been managing crisis after crisis for the past several days. Maya consulted her notes, though she could have recited the information from memory. Dr. Whitman's intelligence indicates that Operation Nightfall was scheduled to commence at 0800 hours with coordinated attacks on 6 primary targets. Based on the communication intercepts she provided, we were able to identify the specific attack vectors and adjust defensive postures accordingly. Major David Park, the intelligence officer who had replaced Colonel Matthews in the chain of command, looked up from his review of the intercepted communications. The enemy forces apparently received stand-down orders approximately 2 hours ago. Signal intelligence suggests they're withdrawing from assault positions around all targeted installations. Dr. Whitman, who had been quietly reviewing technical specifications at the far end of the table, finally spoke. The stand-down orders were transmitted using the same communication protocols that Colonel Matthews had been using to coordinate with enemy forces. When she was detained, her handlers lost their primary intelligence source and decided to abort the operation rather than proceed without current intelligence. General Hawkins studied the tactical map that dominated one wall of the conference room, showing the positions of Allied installations that had been targeted for attack. Dr. Whitman, your assessment of how many lives we potentially saved by exposing this conspiracy. Conservative estimate would be 300 to 400 immediate casualties if the attacks had proceeded as planned, Dr. Whitman replied without hesitation. But the larger intelligence network that Colonel Matthews was part of could have compromised Allied operations throughout the region for months or years to come. The long-term impact is incalculable. Maya felt a mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion as she listened to the post-operation analysis. 36 hours earlier, she'd been trapped in a bunker with her team, fighting for their lives while trying to decode a musical cipher. Now she was sitting in a secure conference room, listening to senior officers discuss the strategic implications of intelligence that she'd helped recover, but the personal cost of the operation weighed heavily on her mind. Staff Sergeant Mike Rodriguez had been wounded during their escape from the tunnel system, taking shrapnel from a grenade explosion that had collapsed part of the passage behind them. He was recovering in a military hospital, but the injury would likely end his career in special operations. Lieutenant Elena Torres had performed brilliantly under pressure, but Maya could see the psychological strain in her eyes. The knowledge that they'd been betrayed by their own command structure would take time to process. "Captain Chun," General Hawkins said, drawing Maya's attention back to the present. "I want you to know that your actions during this operation, both the tactical decisions and the strategic thinking that led to breaking Dr. Whitman's encryption, are being formally recognized. The intelligence you recovered has implications that extend far beyond the immediate threat." Maya nodded, accepting the recognition while privately wondering about the long-term consequences of what they'd discovered. Colonel Matthews had been part of a larger network, and her detention would likely prompt other compromised personnel to take defensive actions. The intelligence war was far from over. Dr. Whitman closed her laptop and looked directly at Maya. "Captain, I want you to understand something about the encryption method I used. The musical algorithm wasn't just a clever way to hide intelligence. It was designed specifically for people like you, military personnel with diverse backgrounds who could think beyond conventional parameters." Maya frowned, not entirely understanding the implication. "What do you mean?" "Your personnel file mentions that you grew up in a musical household, that you had exposure to both Eastern and Western musical traditions," Dr. Whitman explained. "I designed the encryption algorithm to be solvable by someone with that specific background. The polyrhythmic structure, the harmonic frequency relationships, even the temporal patterns, they all drew on musical concepts that would be familiar to someone with your cultural and educational experience." The revelation was simultaneously flattering and disturbing. Maya realized that Dr. Whitman had essentially engineered the solution to her own code, creating an encryption method that could only be broken by someone with a very specific set of knowledge and experiences. "You're saying you knew I would be the one trying to break the code?" Maya asked. "I knew that Colonel Matthews would assign the mission to a Delta Force team, and I knew she would choose personnel who could be easily isolated and eliminated," Dr. Whitman replied matter-of-factly. "But I also knew that Delta Force teams include some of the most creative and adaptable people in the military. Someone on that team would have the background necessary to recognize the musical elements in the encryption." Major Park looked up from his intelligence analysis. "Dr. Whitman, how long had you been planning this operation?" "The encrypted message, the tunnel system, the intelligence gathering facility, this level of preparation suggests months of advance work." 6 months, Dr. Whitman confirmed. "I began to suspect security breaches within Allied intelligence shortly after my initial assignment to the quantum encryption project. The pattern of enemy operations suggested access to classified information that could only have come from within our own command structure." General Hawkins stood and moved to the tactical map, studying the positions of Allied installations throughout the region. "The larger question now is how we prevent this kind of security breach in the future." Colonel Matthews had access to virtually every significant operation in this theater. The amount of intelligence she could have compromised over the past 8 months is staggering. Maya thought about the soldiers under her command and the thousands of other service members whose lives had been put at risk by Colonel Matthews' betrayal. Trust was the foundation of military operations, and that trust had been systematically violated by someone in a position of ultimate responsibility. "General, what happens to Colonel Matthews now?" Maya asked. "Military tribunal, almost certainly followed by court-martial," General Hawkins replied. "The evidence Dr. Whitman collected is comprehensive enough to support charges of treason, conspiracy, and providing aid and comfort to enemy forces. She'll spend the rest of her life in military prison, assuming she survives the legal process." Dr. Whitman gathered her materials and prepared to leave the conference room. "Captain Chun, there's something else you should know. The musical encryption method I developed, it's not just a one-time solution. The algorithm can be modified and adapted for future operations. You've demonstrated an aptitude for this kind of problem solving that goes beyond standard military training." Maya wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a warning. The past 48 hours had shown her capabilities she hadn't known she possessed. But they'd also revealed complexities in military operations that she'd never considered. The line between ally and enemy was apparently more blurred than she'd realized. 3 months later, Maya found herself back at the secure facility where the crisis had been resolved, but this time for a very different purpose. She was conducting training sessions for intelligence personnel on unconventional decryption methods, sharing the techniques she'd developed for breaking Dr. Whitman's musical cipher. The program had grown beyond anything Maya had initially envisioned. Military personnel from across the Allied command structure were attending the sessions, learning to think beyond traditional cryptographic methods. Dr. Whitman had become a consultant to the program, developing new encryption algorithms that drew on cultural, artistic, and historical knowledge rather than purely mathematical principles. Elena Torres had been promoted and transferred to a new intelligence unit that specialized in unconventional threat analysis. She'd maintained her technical skills, but had also developed an appreciation for the human elements of intelligence work. The experience of discovering betrayal within their own command structure had taught her to question assumptions and look for patterns that might not be immediately obvious. Rodriguez had recovered from his injuries and accepted a training position that allowed him to remain in the military despite the limitations imposed by his wounds. He'd become one of the program's most effective instructors, teaching tactical decision-making under extreme stress to special operations personnel. Jackson had requested assignment to Maya's unit and had proven exceptionally capable at the kind of creative problem-solving that the new program required. His dry humor and unflappable demeanor under pressure made him an ideal partner for operations. That required thinking beyond conventional parameters. But perhaps the most significant change was in Maya herself. The experience of breaking Dr. Whitman's code had revealed intellectual capabilities that went beyond tactical leadership. She discovered that her childhood exposure to multiple musical traditions had given her a unique perspective on pattern recognition and analytical thinking. General Hawkins had approached Maya 6 weeks after the crisis resolution with an offer that would change the trajectory of her career. Instead of returning to standard special operations assignments, she could lead a new program that focused on unconventional intelligence challenges, problems that required cultural knowledge, creative thinking, and the ability to make connections that traditional analysis might miss. Maya had accepted the assignment, though not without some reluctance. Part of her missed the straightforward nature of tactical operations, where success and failure were measured in concrete terms. The new program dealt with ambiguities and possibilities, with intelligence challenges that might not have clear solutions. But she'd also discovered a deep satisfaction in the work. Each new encryption challenge, each unconventional intelligence problem, each training session with military personnel from diverse backgrounds contributed to a broader understanding of how cultural knowledge could enhance military effectiveness. Dr. Whitman's musical encryption had been more than just a clever way to hide intelligence. It had been a demonstration of how different ways of thinking could solve problems that traditional methods couldn't address. The program Maya now led was an attempt to institutionalize that kind of creative thinking within military intelligence operations. 6 months after the crisis, Maya received a communication that brought the entire experience full circle. Dr. Whitman had been assigned to a new project that involved developing encryption methods for special operations teams working in culturally diverse environments. The musical algorithm that had started as a desperate attempt to communicate under compromised conditions had evolved into a systematic approach to secure communications, but more importantly, the program had begun to attract personnel from backgrounds that traditional military recruitment might have overlooked. Musicians, artists, linguists, Anthropologists, people whose knowledge and skills complemented rather than duplicated traditional military expertise. To Maya often reflected on the irony that a crisis born from betrayal and deception had led to innovations that strengthened Allied intelligence capabilities. Colonel Matthews' conspiracy had been exposed and neutralized, but the methods developed to counter her betrayal had created new opportunities for military effectiveness. The tunnels where they'd hidden from enemy forces had been secured and converted into a training facility for the new program. Maya sometimes walked through the same passages where she'd led her team to safety, remembering the desperation and uncertainty of those underground hours. Now the tunnels echoed with the voices of students learning to think beyond conventional parameters, turning a place of crisis into a center of innovation. The program's success had attracted attention from military leadership throughout the Allied command structure. Similar initiatives were being developed in other theaters of operation, each one adapted to the specific cultural and linguistic challenges of its region. What had started as a desperate attempt to decode a single encrypted message had evolved into a systematic approach to unconventional intelligence challenges. But perhaps the most meaningful legacy was the change in how military personnel thought about the relationship between cultural knowledge and operational effectiveness. Maya's team had succeeded not just because of their tactical skills, but because they'd been able to recognize patterns and make connections that drew on experiences outside traditional military training. The musical cipher that had nearly cost them their lives had ultimately saved thousands of others, but it had also demonstrated that the most effective military operations often required thinking that transcended conventional boundaries. In a world where conflicts increasingly involved cultural and ideological dimensions, that lesson was becoming more valuable than any single piece of intelligence. As Maya prepared for her next assignment, developing encryption methods for operations in Southeast Asia, she carried with her the knowledge that her grandmother's Urdu lessons and her father's piano practice had contributed as much to mission success as years of military training. The integration of diverse knowledge and experience wasn't just an academic concept. It was a practical necessity for military effectiveness in an increasingly complex world. Dr. Sarah Whitman stood before a graduating class of intelligence officers whose diverse backgrounds would have been unimaginable in traditional military training programs. Maya watched from the back of the auditorium as Whitman delivered the commencement address to students who included concert pianists, linguistic anthropologists, jazz composers, and classical scholars alongside conventional military personnel. The encryption method that brought many of you to this program began as a desperate attempt to communicate under the most dangerous circumstances imaginable, Whitman said, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. But what it became was something far more significant, proof that the most complex problems often require the most unexpected solutions. Maya smiled as she recognized several faces in the graduating class. Lieutenant Sarah Kim, a former violin prodigy from Seoul, had developed encryption algorithms based on Korean traditional music that were now being used throughout the Pacific Theater. Captain Marcus Thompson, who had studied African drumming traditions before joining the military, had created communication protocols that were revolutionizing operations in sub-Saharan Africa, the program that had grown from Maya's desperate attempt to decode a musical cipher now graduated over 200 specialists annually, each one equipped with the cultural knowledge and creative thinking skills that modern military operations demanded. The success rate of unconventional intelligence missions had improved by over 60% since the program's inception, but Maya's thoughts weren't focused on statistics or program metrics. She was remembering the underground tunnel where she'd first heard Dr. Whitman's encrypted rhythm, the moment when musical training from her childhood had suddenly become the key to saving thousands of lives. The convergence of circumstances that had made that breakthrough possible seemed almost miraculous in retrospect. After the ceremony, Maya found herself walking through the memorial garden that had been established to honor the soldiers who had died during the Colonel Matthews conspiracy. 43 names were engraved on the black granite wall, representing Allied personnel who had been killed or wounded because of intelligence that Matthews had provided to enemy forces. Staff Sergeant Mike Rodriguez joined her at the memorial. His slight limp the only visible reminder of the injuries he'd sustained during their escape from the tunnel system. He'd become one of the program's most respected instructors, teaching tactical decision-making under extreme stress to students whose backgrounds often included no previous military experience. "Still thinking about that night in the bunker?" Rodriguez asked, though he already knew the answer. "Every day," Maya replied honestly. "I keep wondering what would have happened if we hadn't been able to break Dr. Whitman's code. How many of these names would have been added to this wall if Operation Nightfall had succeeded?" Rodriguez studied the memorial wall, his expression thoughtful. "Captain, you know what I think about most? How many names aren't on this wall because of what we accomplished? The soldiers who went home to their families instead of becoming casualties. The operations that succeeded because we exposed the security breaches. The missions that never became tragedies because we changed how intelligence operations work." Maya nodded, though the weight of command decisions made years earlier still pressed on her consciousness. Leadership in military operations meant living with the knowledge that every choice carried consequences that extended far beyond immediate circumstances. The success of their mission had saved lives, but it had also revealed vulnerabilities in Allied intelligence that took years to fully address. Elena Torres appeared from the pathway that led to the main training facility, her colonel's insignia reflecting the afternoon sunlight. She'd been promoted twice since the tunnel operation and now commanded the program's Technical Development Division, where she worked with Dr. Whitman to create new encryption methods based on cultural and artistic principles. "Maya, we've got the final numbers from the Southeast Asia pilot program," Elena announced, her excitement evident despite her attempt to maintain professional composure. "The musical encryption protocols you developed are showing a 93% success rate in cross-cultural communication scenarios." The Southeast Asia assignment had been Maya's most challenging project yet, requiring her to develop encryption methods that could be understood by military personnel from dozen different cultural backgrounds, while remaining opaque to potential adversaries. She'd spent 18 months studying traditional music from Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Philippines, looking for mathematical relationships that could form the basis of secure communication protocols. "What about the field testing results?" Maya asked. "Even better. 3 separate special operations teams have used the new protocols in active combat situations, and enemy forces haven't shown any indication that they've intercepted or decoded the communications." Elena pulled out a tablet displaying technical data from recent operations. "Maya, this isn't just successful, it's revolutionary. We're changing how military communications work at a fundamental level." Maya studied the data, feeling a mixture of pride and responsibility. The program that had started with her desperate attempt to understand Dr. Whitman's musical cipher had evolved into a systematic approach to military innovation that was being adopted throughout Allied command structures. But with success came new pressures and expectations that sometimes felt overwhelming. 10 years later, General Maya Chun, her promotion had come with assignment to lead the newly created Unconventional Intelligence Division, stood in the same bunker where her journey had begun, now converted into a training facility for the most advanced students in the program. The concrete walls that had once echoed with gunfire and explosions now resonated with the sounds of students learning to think beyond traditional military parameters. Dr. Whitman, now in her mid-40s with gray streaking her dark hair, continued to serve as the program's chief technical advisor. She'd never fully explained how she'd acquired the engineering knowledge necessary to escape from enemy custody and establish her underground intelligence facility. But Maya had learned to accept that some aspects of Dr. Whitman's story would remain mysterious. "General, we've received another request from NATO Command," Dr. Whitman announced, entering the bunker classroom where Maya was reviewing training materials. "They want to establish similar programs in every member nation. The demand for specialists with unconventional intelligence capabilities is exceeding our capacity to train them." Maya looked up from the lesson plans she'd been developing for the next semester's curriculum. The program had grown beyond anything she'd originally envisioned, but growth brought complications that sometimes threatened the innovative spirit that had made it successful in the first place. "Dr. Whitman, what do you think happens when unconventional thinking becomes conventional? When every military organization has specialists trained in cultural encryption and creative problem solving?" Dr. Whitman considered the question while examining the equipment that filled the converted bunker. "I think we start working on the next generation of problems that conventional wisdom can't solve. The nature of conflict is constantly evolving, and our methods have to evolve with it." Maya nodded, though she sometimes wondered whether the program's success might ultimately limit its effectiveness. The musical encryption methods that had once been incomprehensible to enemy forces were now being studied and countered by hostile intelligence services. Innovation required staying ahead of adversaries who were constantly adapting to new challenges. Elena Torres, now Brigadier General Torres and Maya's deputy commander, entered the bunker, carrying reports from field operations around the world. The program had deployed specialists to every major conflict zone, and their success rate continued to exceed expectations. But Maya could see the exhaustion in Elena's eyes that came from managing a program that had grown exponentially beyond its original scope. "Maya, we need to talk about succession planning," Elena said without preamble. "The program is too large and too important to depend on the original team indefinitely. We need to start developing the next generation of leadership." Maya had been avoiding this conversation for months, though she knew Elena was right. The program had grown from a small experimental unit to a major division within Allied Intelligence Command. It required institutional leadership that could survive changes in personnel and shifting military priorities. But Maya also worried about losing the innovative spirit that had made the program successful. The unconventional thinking that had broken Dr. Whitman's musical cipher couldn't be easily systematized or institutionalized. It required individuals who could make creative connections under pressure, who could see patterns that others missed, who could think beyond established parameters. "What do you have in mind?" Maya asked. Elena pulled up organizational charts on her tablet, displaying proposed command structures for the program's continued expansion. "We establish regional commands led by graduates who understand both the technical aspects and the innovative philosophy. We create advanced training programs for senior leadership positions. We develop institutional knowledge that can survive personnel changes." Maya studied the proposed structures while thinking about the path that had brought her to this point. 15 years earlier, she'd been a tactical commander focused on immediate operational objectives. The discovery of Dr. Whitman's musical cipher had revealed capabilities she hadn't known she possessed, but it had also launched her into responsibilities she'd never anticipated. The program had become her life's work, but she sometimes wondered whether her continued involvement was helping or hindering its development. Innovation often required fresh perspectives, and Maya worried that her own thinking might be limiting the program's potential. 15 years later, Colonel David Kim, one of Maya's first students and now the program's director of operations, stood before a memorial ceremony that honored the 20th anniversary of the tunnel operation that had started everything. Maya, now retired from active duty but serving as a civilian consultant, watched from the audience as Kim delivered a speech that captured both the historical significance and the ongoing legacy of that desperate night underground. The courage and creativity that General Chun and her team demonstrated in those tunnels continues to inspire everyone who serves in this program," Kim said, his voice carrying clearly through the auditorium filled with current students, program graduates, and military leadership from around the world. But perhaps more importantly, their example reminds us that the most significant breakthroughs often come from the most unexpected combinations of knowledge and experience. Maya felt a deep satisfaction as she looked around the audience and recognized faces that represented the global expansion of the program. Former students now led similar units in dozens of countries, each one adapted to the specific cultural and linguistic challenges of its region. The principles they'd discovered during the crisis with Colonel Matthews had evolved into a systematic approach to military innovation that was changing how conflicts were understood and resolved. Dr. Whitman, now in her early 50s and serving as a senior advisor to multiple international intelligence organizations, had continued to develop encryption methods that drew on increasingly sophisticated cultural and artistic principles. Her work had expanded beyond military applications to include diplomatic communications, corporate security, and academic research on the relationship between culture and information theory. Elena Torres had retired from military service to establish a private consulting firm that specialized in unconventional intelligence challenges, but she maintained close connections with the program and frequently returned to teach advanced courses. Her expertise in technical analysis combined with her understanding of creative problem-solving had made her one of the most sought-after consultants in the intelligence community. Rodriguez had passed away 3 years earlier from complications related to his old injuries, but his influence on the program continued through the dozens of instructors he'd trained and the thousands of students who had learned tactical decision-making from his courses. His memorial in the training facility reminded everyone that innovation in military operations often came at a personal cost that should never be forgotten. Jackson had chosen to remain in active duty and now commanded a special operations unit that specialized in missions requiring unconventional intelligence capabilities. His dry humor and unflappable demeanor under pressure had made him legendary among special operations personnel, and his unit consistently achieved success rates that exceeded conventional military expectations. But perhaps the most meaningful legacy was visible in the diversity of the current student body. The auditorium contained military personnel whose backgrounds included everything from classical music to linguistic anthropology, from traditional crafts to advanced mathematics. The program had demonstrated that military effectiveness could be enhanced by embracing rather than suppressing the cultural knowledge that service members brought from their civilian backgrounds. As the ceremony concluded, Maya found herself walking through the memorial garden that had grown to include remembrances of program graduates who had died in service around the world. The original memorial to the victims of Colonel Matthews' conspiracy remained at the center, but it was now surrounded by tributes to individuals who had carried the program's innovative spirit into conflicts and challenges that the original team could never have anticipated. Dr. Whitman joined Maya at the central memorial, her expression thoughtful as she studied the names of soldiers who had died because of betrayal within their own command structure. "General, do you ever wonder whether we've succeeded too well? Whether the institutionalization of unconventional thinking has made it conventional?" Maya considered the question while watching current students practice communication protocols based on musical principles that had once been known only to her team. "I think about it constantly. But then I see graduates using methods we never could have imagined, solving problems we never would have thought to address, and I realize that innovation isn't something you can institutionalize, it's something you can only create conditions for." They stood in comfortable silence for several minutes. Two women whose chance encounter during a crisis had led to changes in military operations that neither could have predicted. The musical cipher that had nearly cost them their lives had ultimately saved thousands of others, but more importantly, it had demonstrated principles that continued to generate new solutions to evolving challenges. 25 years later, Maya Chun, now in her 70s and serving as Professor Emeritus at the Advanced Military Studies Institute, received a communication that brought her full circle to the beginning of her journey. A new crisis had emerged in a remote region where conventional intelligence methods had failed, and military leadership was requesting her consultation on an encrypted message that appeared to use principles similar to Dr. Whitman's original musical cipher. The message had been intercepted from a humanitarian organization working in a conflict zone, but standard decryption methods had proven ineffective. Intelligence analysts suspected that the organization was using some form of cultural encryption to protect communications about refugee movements and medical supplies, but they couldn't determine the underlying methodology. Maya studied the encrypted message on her computer screen, recognizing patterns that reminded her of the desperate hours she'd spent in an underground bunker trying to decode Dr. Whitman's original cipher. The numbers seemed to dance before her eyes with the same tantalizing familiarity that had eventually led to breakthrough understanding. But this time, Maya wasn't working alone in a crisis situation. She had access to the accumulated knowledge of 25 years of program development, thousands of graduates who specialized in unconventional intelligence challenges, and sophisticated analytical tools that could process cultural and artistic patterns with unprecedented precision. Within hours, Maya had identified the basic structure of the encryption method, a system based on traditional weaving patterns from the region where the humanitarian organization was operating. The mathematical relationships that govern textile design had been adapted to create a communication protocol that would be invisible to outsiders but immediately recognizable to anyone familiar with local cultural traditions. The solution revealed not just the content of the intercepted messages, but also the ingenious adaptation of cultural knowledge to meet contemporary security challenges. The humanitarian organization had independently developed methods that paralleled the program Maya had helped create, demonstrating that the principles they'd discovered weren't unique but represented fundamental relationships between culture and information theory. As Maya prepared her analysis for transmission to current military leadership, she reflected on the path that had brought her to this moment. A single night in an underground tunnel, trying to decode a musical cipher while enemy forces closed in around her team, had led to a career devoted to exploring the intersection of cultural knowledge and military effectiveness. The program she'd helped establish continued to evolve and expand, adapting to new challenges and incorporating new forms of cultural knowledge. But the fundamental principle remained constant. The most complex problems often required the most unexpected solutions. And those solutions frequently came from individuals who could think beyond conventional parameters. Maya's last official act before submitting her analysis was to recommend that the current program leadership establish contact with the humanitarian organization, not to recruit their personnel, but to learn from their innovations. The evolution of unconventional intelligence capabilities required constant learning from diverse sources, and Maya had learned that the most valuable insights often came from the most unexpected places. As she sent her final report, Maya thought about Dr. Whitman, Elena Torres, Rodriguez, Jackson, and the countless students and graduates who had carried forward the innovative spirit that began with a desperate attempt to break a musical cipher. The program had become larger and more sophisticated than any of them had imagined, but it had retained the essential characteristic that made it effective: the willingness to look beyond conventional wisdom and find solutions in the most unexpected places. The last line of Maya's report captured the lesson that had guided her entire career. Innovation in military operations requires not just technical expertise, but also the cultural knowledge and creative thinking that can only come from embracing the full diversity of human experience. Maya closed her laptop and walked to the window of her office, looking out at the training facility where the next generation of unconventional intelligence specialists was learning to think beyond traditional military parameters. The future would bring new challenges that no one could currently anticipate. But Maya was confident that the principles they discovered would continue to generate innovative solutions. The musical cipher that had started everything was now taught as a historical example in basic encryption courses. But its true legacy lived on in the thousands of individuals who had learned to see patterns where others saw only chaos, to find meaning in unexpected places, and to solve problems that conventional wisdom declared unsolvable. Maya's journey from desperate tactical commander to innovative military educator was ending. But the program she'd helped create would continue to evolve and adapt, ensuring that future crises would be met with the same combination of courage, creativity, and cultural knowledge that had turned a moment of desperation into a foundation for lasting change. The story that had begun with the sound of gunfire and the desperate attempt to decode an impossible cipher had become a testament to the power of human creativity to overcome even the most challenging circumstances. And in classrooms around the world, new students were learning that sometimes the most important breakthroughs came not from following established procedures, but from having the courage to listen for patterns that others might dismiss as mere noise. In a small cafe in Portland, Oregon, an elderly woman plays piano melodies that follow mathematical rather than traditional musical principles. The few patrons who notice assume she's practicing scales or working through technical exercises. But occasionally, someone with the right background recognizes that the patterns contain encoded information messages about refugee movements, medical supply routes, and safe passage coordinates for humanitarian operations around the world. The musical cipher that once saved thousands of lives in a tunnel beneath the mountains of Afghanistan continues to evolve, adapted by individuals who understand that the most important communications often require the most unexpected methods. And somewhere in the world, someone is listening to those patterns and hearing not just music, but the sound of hope encoded in mathematical relationships that only a few can understand. The legacy of Captain Maya Chun and Dr. Sarah Whitman lives on in every person who refuses to accept that a problem is unsolvable, who looks for patterns in unexpected places, and who understands that the greatest innovations often come from the intersection of different ways of knowing.